Wow, how time flies, huh? Feels like just not that long ago we were talking about OP15 pre-release, and here we are talking about OP16. That's right, in a couple of weeks, the pre-releases for OP16 are going to be starting at your local gaming stores and Bandai stores. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about all the event info that you need to know before you go to your event, some general tips for the pre-release format, and also some top techs that I've picked out for specifically OP16 pre-release events. My name is Joe, drink of the day was orange juice, and welcome to my ultimate guide to OP16 pre-release. But first, I need to tell you that Sleeve Chief are currently having their 4th anniversary sale, with huge discounts across a variety of products like this Blackbeard playmat and their popular Umbreon binder, plus reprints of other popular lines such as the Brothers Tragedy bundle. Now is the perfect time to bling out your setup. Double use scalps. And if you do pick up anything from Sleeve Chief, please do remember to use code MARINE for 5% off. And thank you to Sleeve Chief for sponsoring this video. Now, starting off with the event info, this is going to be running from June 5th to 11th at all Bandai stores and your LGSs. Make sure you check on the Bandai TCG Plus or ask your store owner for the exact date that your store is running their event. These events can be ran as constructed or sealed. Constructed is the format that we play every week on the sim, at your stores, at regionals. So the vast majority of stores do choose to run these as sealed, and that's what the majority of this video is going to be discussing. For playing, you're going to get a promo of this new Luffy here. He looks okay. I don't think this is too meta relevant, but could be a nice little option for the new Starter Deck 30 Luffy to have. And you're also going to get the Rainbow Luffy leader, who we'll talk about in a minute. You're also going to get a pack of 2 cards that contain commons or uncommons with a release event stamp, like this shoe that you can see up here in the top right. And if you are lucky enough to win, you're going to win this full art version of the Luffy promo. With this being a Luffy and what's been going on with winner cards very recently, I actually expect this one to be quite expensive. So this should be quite a nice prize if you're able to win your pre-release. Now, if you're brand new to pre-release, welcome. Hope you have a great time. But what do you need to bring? Firstly, bring some sleeves to protect your cards. Bring yourself a playmat in case the table's a bit sticky. Some dice so you can determine who's going first and keep track of power manipulation. Leaders if you need them, and we'll discuss that on some of the following slides. And also do bring a playset of 10 Don. If you don't have 10 Don, if you are brand new, don't worry. Someone at your local gaming store will be able to lend you some. Or you could even use backwards cards. Now, but how does sealed work in One Piece? Well, you're going to open 6 packs of the new set, and then you're going to build a 40 card deck. Normally in Constructed we play 50, in pre-release you have far less cards, so you can be playing with 40. There are no colour restrictions, and there are no card count restrictions. So what this means is if you play a mono red leader, you can include purple cards, you can include blue cards, you can include whatever card you like. And if you do pull more than 4 of a certain card, you can include all of them. And the rest of your pulls are your sideboard. So if after round 1 you realise you didn't read a card properly, we've all been there, you can take that out and replace it with something else from the rest of your packs, which function as your sideboard. You can't sideboard during a match, obviously, but between rounds. Now, some general tips. Board control is important, just like it is in Constructed. Finding the balance between pressuring your opponent's life and taking out their board when it's efficient is a fundamental skill. If you get too crazy just attacking their leader, well, you might get swept on the clapback. And if you get too crazy playing board, well, you might just run out of time and die yourself. Blockers are invaluable. Be aware of what your opponent could do to get around them. There is not much removal in this set. However, there are a few unblockable cards and cards that can rest blockers. So just be aware, give yourself a once-over of the set list so that you know what to expect. Removal is actually quite rare in pre-release, but when there is removal, it's usually very powerful. Some of the best effects in the game for pre-release end up being removal cards. And know when you've lost the board. Setting up to win in 2 turns is as important in this as it is in Constructed. You're not going to be able to kill all of your opponent's characters, and you don't have to take out every character in their deck. You just have to take out their leader, so don't be afraid to pivot. And when attacking effects are in general stronger in pre-release than they are in Constructed because of that lack of removal and interaction. Now, in terms of the 2 different formats, most stores are now forcing everyone to use the Rainbow Luffy leader, and for my money, that is the more fun and balanced format. However, some stores will say that you can use a leader that you pull from your packs, or a leader that you have in your binder. Make sure you check with your store which format they're doing, but I'll discuss both of them here. Now, Rainbow Luffy. Rainbow Luffy is a 5-life rainbow leader with all colours, and he's considered to have all colours, all names, all attributes, and all types. This means that whilst he says strike up in the top right, this leader is considered to have the / attribute, and thus will work with this Perona. Luffy is also considered to have all names, and that includes both Nico Robin, so you'd be able to use the trigger of Jaguar D Soul, and Kung Fu Dugong, so you'd be able to make your Kung Fu Dugong a blocker. This sort of serves to make it such that the vast majority of the set works, and a lot of stores will choose to do this with the Rainbow Luffy leader now. Some are still doing choose a leader. I think that format is just so much worse, given how many more cards are type or leader locked, at least now compared to how they used to be. There's far less just generic cards, and this Rainbow Luffy makes the matches a lot more interesting, and also fair. However, if your store is not doing that, here are some of the best ones. Broadly, Red Sanji has been the most popular for a while, because Rush is very powerful and not very common in Prerelease. I'm not going to dwell on this slide because the vast majority of stores are switching over to Rainbow Luffy. And if they let you choose Rainbow Luffy, I think he is a valid consideration over some of these leaders, given quite how many cards are leader locked. But what about the new leaders? Well, I'm covering Luffy, but it doesn't really matter, because all of these are kind of terrible. They're all super archetypal in what they want to do, and you're just not going to have the cards from your packs to make any of these work. Red Ace is probably about the best, but it's still not great. But what should you include in your deck? Well, all 2Ks, you're going to need counter, and 2Ks are simply better than 1Ks. You won't end up with too many of them, so I put them all in. Vanillas have big stat lines, and also this 4th line, vanill-ish cards. It's cards with a vanilla stat line. Like this Magellan here, he's an 8/10, but does not have counter. They're very good because just having powerful units is even more valuable in pre-release, because there are far less sort of tricks and combos going on. It's much more of a slugging fest. Blockers are brilliant. Your opponent is going to want to go to lethal. If you can present 2 blockers on the turn before they have to go for it, well, there's a good chance you just win off of that. It can also stop your opponent taking out one of your most important characters. Powerful plays, obviously that's subjective. I've got a bunch of slides towards the end that showcase what I think are some of the best cards. Sticky bodies, and this just means cards that are either very hard for your opponent to get off the board, or your opponent is incentivized to not get them off the board. Again, returning to this Magellan, on KO, your opponent's got to return 4 cards to their Don deck. That's painful. So they're just going to not KO Magellan. So Magellan's going to get to stick there for probably the whole game and get to swing for 10k every turn, which is incredible. Rush, there's not a lot of Rush in this set, but Rush is always a good characteristic to have because you can create surprise lethals. And good removal, again, there is not a lot of good removal in this deck, but in general pre-release removal, especially character-based removal, developing your own guy and removing your opponent's guy, it's like getting a 2-for-1. But what should you avoid? Now, there's a bit of a caveat on some of these in this set, so actually some good exceptions, but attacking units with under 5,000 power. Now, if you're familiar with the set, a lot of the Impel Down cards in blue, such as the Mr. 2 and Mr. 1, have very low power, but they have ways to increase that power, so they kind of don't. An example of this is this Arlong. This Arlong is terrible. 1/3 vanillas, we don't like these. They don't do anything. You've got to put 2 Dons on him to attack. It's just a really weak card. Combo pieces with few targets, such as Let's Go to the Navy Headquarters. Really cool combo card for Constructed, but you are never going to have 5 different Impel Down characters with different names on the board. It's just not going to happen, so don't play this card. Archetype block cards like Vasco Shot, he's brilliant with Black Yellow Blackbeard's leader effect, but if you're playing with Rainbow Luffy or Red Sanji or something, this card doesn't do anything other than have a funny trigger. And finally, Searchers. Searchers are brilliant and Constructed because you build your deck around them. And this Hannibal is actually not one of the worst because there are 2 colors that have Impel Down in this set. But I still probably wouldn't play it because it's a 2/3, stat line's bad, and it can whiff. And if you whiff a Searcher, that's painful. You know how painful that is in constructed? In pre-release, that's happening way more. Now, we talked about 2Ks, and I do still think you should include all the ones you get, but these ones, if you do have to cut some, these are some of the more underwhelming ones. You'll notice they all have horrible stat lines and not great effects, or very conditionally good effects. Now, we're not going to dwell on these, but the best of these is probably Namuel, if I had to pick one. Good 2Ks, these are all good. They either have good stat lines like Shanks and Jinbei, as long as you're willing to give him a Don, or cool effects like Monkey D. Luffy giving something unblockable. A special shout out to Sengoku, who is just a ridiculous card, like ramping twice and getting a draw 2 trash 2. If your leader is Navy, of course, but Rainbow Luffy is. That's a nuts effect for a 2K with a usable stat line. 5/5 is not great, but it ain't the worst. And getting a double ramp, you can be playing out a 9 cost on your next turn. That's kind of nuts. And finally, vanilla 2Ks. Vanilla 2Ks are some of the best 2Ks. Impel Down Prisoner is not strictly a vanilla, but in this format it is, because that rule is already in the rules of the game. So it's just a slightly worse smoker. What a treat. But vanilla 2Ks just fill out your curve. If you are on 5 Don, you'd prefer to play a 5/7. But if you don't have one, well, you could play Jinbei or Navy Brother, and they can start swanging from next turn. It's not too bad. Also, shout out that we're finally getting bigger vanilla 2Ks. In the past, we've only ever got 4/5s, 5/6s, and 6/7s. Now we've got a 7/8 and an 8/9. The 7/8 especially combos with a couple of things in red, but this 8/9 Sanji is really large. What a treat. Now, in terms of average 2K counts, there were a million in OP15. There were a ridiculous amount of 2Ks in that set. This set, we're kind of back to normal. This is a normal amount of 2Ks. I think on average, you'll get between 10 and 12. Will you need to include all of them? Probably. If you get more than 12, though, I'd consider cutting yourself down to 12. Vanillas, I didn't know where to put myself. There's only 3 in this set. They're all really good because they're all really big. Vanilla stat lines are great. We love the vanillas. And they've got 1K counter to boot. Special shout out to these two 6/8s for being specifically 8,000 power, which combos with a couple of things in red. Now, before we move on, I want to talk about this Luffy, because I think this Luffy is one of the best cards, if not the best single card that you can pull in this pre-release. Firstly, if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, your leader's name does include Ace, so it'll be a 2/6, which is good. And then this opponent's turn effect is nuts. Not only do we have a lot of red 8,000 power units in this set, there are also a load of other random ones. All of the admirals, which one of the weakest points about these cards, right, is that they're bricks. Kuzan, Borsalino, Sakazuki, brilliant cards, all bricks. Well, Luffy says no, actually, they're going to buff this guy and your leader to 7K for the entire turn. That's going to make countering out much easier. But there's also just a load of other ones. There's a few vanillas, there's a 2K, there's a load in red, as you'll see over the next slides. Both the Yamatos, the 6/8 Shiryu SR, this random Doflamingo common. It's a lot of 8K, so if you pull this card, you're probably going to want to then include every 8K power unit you get. So consider that carefully. Now, vanilla-ish cards, as I said before, these are cards with vanilla stat lines, for example 5/7, but they have effects. Pretty much all of these are really good effects. Special shoutouts to some of the ones that are not good in constructed, but are pretty solid in this format. Maku Guy, or Mook Guy, him down at the bottom. Your opponent's just not going to kill this, because then you just get to kill an 8,000 power unit, which is just wild. These Zoros up top both have great effects. I don't know how good they're going to be in constructed, but drawing 1 when attacking is brilliant for sealed, especially if you are playing Red Sanji. This is one of the best cards you can combine with that in this format. Magellan, like Magai, is just enormous and basically unremovable. Can also throw your opponent off curve slightly, maybe if you're able to ramp into it or something. But generally, all of these cards, from the 3/5s to the 8/10s, I would include all copies of these that you get. Oh, and the Mihawk. This guy is terrible, going to be terrible in constructed. But this having rush character and a draw 2 trash 2, that's going to help fix your hand and just give you an extra bit of board clear. So that's one that I would especially watch out for, is the Mihawk. Now, Chump Blockers, again, I would include all blockers except one in this set. Chump Blockers are blockers with very low stat lines. They sometimes have good effects, sometimes they do not. For this set, Rosinante has an interesting effect. If you whiff a 4-drop, you can play him and then ramp up 1, assuming you're playing Rainbow Luffy. Usopp is weird because there's no just Rosa stages in the set. But you can rest your Rainbow Luffy leader if you just leave him active. I feel like this isn't happening very often, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And then you've just got a few Chump Blockers. Inazuma, they're just not going to carry this one. So it has a bit of sticking power. Great Blockers. Great Blockers are even better than Chump Blockers because these have meaningful stat lines. You can attack with them, and most of them have pretty good effects as well. These 3 5/6s are going to be pretty hard to use. Beckman is basically a vanilla 5/6 blocker, but that is still good enough in my book to be a good character worth playing. Odin and Miss Olive give you conditional draw, but the conditions aren't too hard to meet, so they're definitely worth playing. Buggy is not a blocker, but he can create a blocker, and he's also just a 5/6 that draws one. So even if you don't pull any Prisoners of Impel down, and you can't play one out, this is still a good card. These at the top are all massive blockers. 8k is just an incredible stat line for a blocker. Of these, I think Borsalino is the best because he's able to resand every turn. But don't sleep on Thatch and Little Oars. These can both become cheaper and give you cheap, enormous blockers. Finally, these two down here have Trigger Play. Trigger Plays are another category of cards that are pretty much always worth including. And these being Trigger Play blockers, incredible. Now, in terms of underwhelming blockers, there's only sort of one this set. And depending on what you pull, you could maybe get this guy's effect off. If you get, like, the Odin and maybe the 6-cost Yamato, a couple other cards, it could be okay. But I think this Momo is extremely expensive for what it is. And if you're not playing a 6, this is just a waste of 9 dom. Now, moving on to events. Firstly, those that you might want to activate main on. For these two on the left are ones that I'm confident are going to be good. If you're playing Rainbow Luffy, Gum Gum Twin Jet Pistol is just going to give you the option of going for double attack and resting a bunch of cheap blockers because you will have the Impel down type. It's a no-brainer when you're going for lethal. And the same with Black Hole, again, is just going to make your lethal even better, as long as you have a trigger card to trash. These over on the right I'm less confident in. Black Vortex is an interesting search event, because it's way more generic, but there's also a lot of cards that don't have triggers, so I don't know if this one's worth the cut. Let's show them what we're made of. I think should be good if you can actually get the effect off, but you may well not pull enough 8k power Whitebeard Pirates. And Zihahaha, Reject is banned, and that's a 4-cost event that says dealer damage. This is an 8-cost event that may well let you cheat out a Martial Teach, but it still lets you burn a life. I don't know, it's not the worst, but it's also not the best. Now, hybrid events. I love hybrid events. There's actually no counter events in this set that I think are worth playing, but these hybrid events are awesome, and one of the most interesting ones, and two of the most interesting ones are these two on the left. Gum Gum Hammer Rifle's main effect, right? Your leader is both, if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, it's going to be both Monkey D. Luffy and Mr. 3 Galdino. So you fulfill both conditions with your leader. So you don't need those characters. Do watch out for the translation. Maybe it'll end up saying character on the translation. But yeah, this main effect is just genuinely very, very good. Just freeze a 6 for 1 dom. Pretty cool. Prisoners of Rioting. There's another one. Your leader counts as both Buggy for the second effect, for the counter effect. But it also counts as Prisoner of Impel Down. The main effect. So when you go for lethal, this is a +1 to your leader and a +1 to any prisoners you've got on the board. Very funny. Don't miss that, because that could be the difference, right? That 1k could be huge. But obviously you're mainly playing this for the counter effect. This is a new 0-cost. If you're coming with me, kiss your lives goodbye. The main effect on this one is not too hot. It's okay, I guess. You're playing this because it's a 0-cost. And Hallowed Glacier Slash, if this was only a main, like the Zoro event, I think this would be a lot weaker because of that condition that you have to carry a character. But because your Rainbow Luffy leader is Yamato, having a 3k buff that can also restand your leader for like a cheeky lethal, that seems pretty good to me. Now, stages. Moby Dick is an absolute no-brainer. It just searches your deck for anything, the top 3, and then can give you Arrested Don whenever you demand it. If you're playing Rainbow Luffy, this is a no-brainer. Marineford's a bit more weird. You should find something, probably. But even if you don't, you get a draw 1, trash 1 every turn, so long as you're willing to Don -1. You may not be willing to Don -1, but it's interesting. I'm not sure Marineford makes the cut, but it's worth considering. Even though it is a searcher, it has this second effect, which is really quite strong. In terms of other cards to watch out for, Ace and Wolf have a bit of sticking power because your opponent is not going to want to kill them. Mr. 3 is vanill-ish, and Speed Jill is the only Rosh in the set. So definitely watch out for Speed Jill. Moji and Cabbagey can draw you a couple cards, which is pretty cool, and these Admirals are incredible. Kuzan denying blocker every turn, whilst ramping you 2 Don. Feels pretty good. And Sakazuki, I think, is one of the better cards in the set. Certainly if you are playing a Navy leader, which Rainbow Luffy is. Down here in the bottom, at the start I warned against small attacking characters, but both of these for just Don X1 become a reasonable size and draw you a card on play, so they're both definitely worth playing. Garp and Ace down here in the bottom left are both nice 5/6 bodies. Garp has ridiculous ramp again like Sengoku, and Ace can potentially turn all those 8Ks like Kuzan and Sakazuki into 2Ks, whilst giving you potentially a bit of surge. You're probably not going to pull this because it's a secret rare, but it's definitely worth including if you do. Finally, down here in the bottom right, I think we've already talked about Thatch, actually. He probably shouldn't be on this slide, but he's made it here. What a guy. And Law being able to freeze a character whilst developing a really good sized body. And then the end of turn effect, I don't know how relevant that one's going to be. There's a lot of green characters in this set that are pretty bad, but it's cute. Speaking of green characters, there's a lot of them here on the Sleeper Picks slide. Sleeper Picks, these are cards that I think are not as good as these ones, but still worth considering. Up here, you got a few other 4 costs with decent effects. Law can give you a ramp, which is cool. And then he becomes a 6k when attacking probably only once, because your opponent will just take him out pretty sharpish. Mr. 2 similarly gets to attack for a decent value once and has an okay on play. Morley, unblockable is great. Unblockable is another keyword that you've got to watch out for. And this guy has a bit of sticking power as well. Up here in the top right, these 2 searchers. I did warn against searchers, but there are 2 colours that are focused around Impel Down in this set. So it's much less likely that they'll whiff, and they're both relevant attacking threats, whereas that Hanyabal is not. Down here in the bottom left, these are all kind of cope, but they're not too bad if you're stuck for cards to fill out your deck. Luffy and Galdino have very sort of niche-ish effects. If Luffy can't be dealt with, he can get some value, but I don't actually know if he's worth it. I didn't rate Girl when she was the pre-release promo, and this is kind of objectively worse than Girl for Rainbow Luffy. This Galdino is very cute when you go for lethal. Can rest most blockers in the game. Watch out for that one. And then this Dofi is just kind of fine. Ramping at this point in the game isn't that relevant. Once you're at 7, he can cheat you to 10 one turn early. But it's still a 7/8 body, and if you have a lot of Don minus for some reason, then, you know, maybe he can come in clutch. Now, some specific tips for OP16. There's an average number of 2Ks, so I think you're going to want to include all of them. Last set, again, that was a silly number, so if that was your first pre-release, that's not normal. You're going to get a regular amount of 2Ks. And it's also worth noting, we're back down to normal set sizes. There's no half of an EBO4, which is nice, because you're going to see more of these cards more often. There's not much rush outside of the red Sanji leader. In fact, it's just Speed Jill, if I'm not mistaken. So don't expect too much rush. You don't have to play around that all too much. Although there is that one restand Yamato event. The vanilla 2Ks are back to commons. They keep changing the rarity of these. I don't know, man. But your curve should be more reliable than average. I think I prefer second. If we look at some of these slides, you'll have to excuse my face being there. There's a lot of good 4 costs in this other cards. And in the vanill-ish slide... Where are we? Here we are. There's a lot of good 4s and a lot of good 6s. Look down here. 5 really good 6s. And some of these are much lower rarity as well. Look at you, my guy. So, personally, I think I'm taking second to this set. However, do look at your card pool. If you just pull all 5s and 7s, take first. As I said before, there's very little rush, but there's also very, very little removal, next to none. So your blockers should get a lot of value, but be careful about those rest effects like Mr. 3. Most blockers are also fairly high quality. It's only really that Momo that I think is kind of bad, and even he's not that bad given the right situation. That can actually be a really good play. So if a card says blocker on it, you're probably going to put it in your deck this set. And finally, that 4-cost Luffy SR could be giga broken if you get a lot of 8k units. It turns your leader into blue-yellow Nami. It's kind of crazy, man. I don't know about that one. I don't know. I think that Luffy SR, it's one to watch if you're able to pull that. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If there's any text that you think I missed, please do leave them in the comments. We're all trying to win. I think I've got one pre-release that I'm going to this time. Can't make my usual store, but the second store in our city started doing events now, so that's pretty exciting. Thank you for watching. Good luck at your pre-releases. I hope you have a brilliant time. If this is your first event, everyone's going to be lovely. You're going to have a brilliant time. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.